Welcome everyone to this roundtable where we will be discussing best practices to address gender-based violence with youth. This event is part of the Caribbean United Against GBV project, which is funded by the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, and is led by the Cloé.
For example, the teachers may be filling out self-report fidelity rubrics after each lesson that they give for the fourth hour. So we need to make sure that they're comfortable using those rubrics and so that we're able to get quality data. As we're implementing, we also want to use evaluation designs. There's this new push or transition beyond randomized controlled trials that have been found to not really, they provide evidence on effect, on efficacy. But once these interventions that were tested under really highly controlled settings are moved into real life situations in the community, they tend to not have the same effect. So scientists in the area of dissemination and implementation science are really saying we need to use new pragmatic trial methods that have a focus on internal and external validity, and also have a strong focus on effectiveness. Similarly, we need to use these new hybrid effectiveness implementation designs that help us guide evaluation of those two really important components of understanding the effectiveness of the intervention in these settings. Next slide, please. And then when we're evaluating, best practice is really to collect mixed methods data. So not just survey, not just focus groups or interviews, but both. And additionally, using specifically when we're evaluating fidelity of implementation, using observation. So having the researcher or research assistant go in, for example, and observing teachers as they are implementing one of the lessons of the fourth R, and seeing how closely or what aspects of the lesson, how completely they're implementing each lesson and with what level of quality. So mixed methods data that should be about, again, effectiveness and implementation. The mixed methods data should come from diverse stakeholders. So in the case of the fourth R, we would want to know about effectiveness and implementation from the perspective of students, teachers, other staff and administrators within the school that the intervention is being implemented, maybe even caregivers, right? Caregivers of the adolescents, because we know that they have a really important role in how effective and how well the intervention can be implemented. And then, of course, we, as much as is possible, we'd like to collect data over the short and long term to get an idea of sustainability of the program. Something else that's really important to be evaluating with these programs is the costs and resources required to implement. So there are some new pragmatic methods for calculating costs and resources. This is one of the most important factors in adoption of interventions, particularly in low and middle income country settings. But at the same time, it's one of the least often collected and reported pieces of information about implementation. So it's really important that we start to be sure that that's part of our evaluation plan. And then finally, in addition to looking at those pieces of re-aim, so reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation and maintenance, those implementation outcomes that we talked about in an earlier slide, we also want to look at equity and sustainability with respect to all of those 5 areas, to be sure that the effect is both sustainable, the intervention is sustainable, and that to be able to identify which groups are benefiting most from the intervention and how we need to adapt it in subsequent offerings to make the impact and reach of the intervention more equitable for all individuals who serve to benefit from the intervention. Next slide. So that's it. That's just thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I know that was kind of broad, but I thought it might be helpful for all of us as we're thinking through the most effective, evidence-based, rigorous strategies to really bring these evidence-based interventions to prevent gender-based violence into our country contexts here within the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
And I would like to introduce now our next panelist. We are going to be hearing from 2 colleagues in CESIE, who are Cloé, Saint-Nom and Francesca Barbino, talking about participatory approaches and sex education to tackle gender-based violence, including teen dating violence among young people. And I would love to tell you a little bit more about them. Cloé Saint-Nom is a Rights and Justice Unit Coordinator at CESIE. She has a background in international relations, global development, and gender studies. She also has experience in research, data analysis, design, and implementation of European Union and non-European Union funded projects in Latin America and in Europe as well. As a project manager, coordinator, and trainer, she has gained experience in gender mainstreaming, gender equality, gender-based violence prevention, and support to victims and survivors. Also child protection, intercultural diversity, social inclusion, capacity building of authorities, professionals, and young people from different backgrounds through non-formal education methods. So we were talking about in-school programs before a little bit, and now we're moving a bit to non-school programs as well. And her colleague, Francesca Barbino, she's a project manager at CESIE, and after 2 master's degrees in international relations and political sciences, she has gained international experience in the field of human rights, working for NGOs and public entities in Italy and abroad. Within CESIE, her work is focused on improving quality in school education, strengthening teachers and students' skills through innovative tools, and promoting equality and prevention of any form of violence, including gender-based violence and teen dating violence. So welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Hello, hi everyone.
Hi, Cloé.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, I am Cloé Saint-Nom. I am here with my colleague Francesca Barbino. And if Anna, you could share your screen for our presentation.
Sure. 1 second.
So just to say a few words while the presentation is being loaded, we are joining you from Sicily in Italy. We are very glad to be here and to hear all the interventions and all the work that is being done in very different contexts, but with the same aim in tackling gender-based violence. And a little bit to continue with what Heidi was saying, we're going to approach participatory approaches in sex education to tackle gender-based violence in young people. And we're going to focus also on teen dating violence through different projects we are implementing at local and European level with CESIE, the organization we represent. You can move on. So this is us, just for you to see our faces, Cloé and Francesca. We both work at the Rights and Justice Unit at CESIE. Move on, please. Okay, so just a few words about our organization. We are an association, an European Center of Studies and Initiatives, an association which works inspired by the work and theories of Danilo Dolci. And we promote innovation in education, participation and growth through a series of initiatives that we carry on at local, European and international level. We are, if you can go forward. Thank you. We are divided into 6 different units, depending on the target group and the scope of the initiatives and projects that we carry out. We have the Higher Education and Research Unit, the Rights and Justice Unit, the Adult Unit, the Migration Unit, the School Unit, and the Youth Unit, just so that you can have a very broad idea of the work that we carry out and the fields in which we work. Next, please. We are quite an international team. We are more than 70 or 80 people actually working within the organization, and we also have a broad network of different partners, universities, schools, research centers, external experts, and interns and volunteers who join us every year around the world. So this is basically us very shortly. Next, please. So just a few words about our unit specifically, because this is very related to what we do and what CESIE does in relation to gender-based violence. We are focused in promoting equality, diversity and non-discrimination, gender equality and rights awareness among a vast variety of stakeholders. We also both support and prevent victims and violence in general, with a focus on gender-based violence, child abuse, and violence both online and offline, including radicalization. Next, please. As I was saying before, we work with a very vast array of stakeholders and beneficiaries, with victims and survivors of violence, support service professionals, different networks we have created or joined, public authorities, online platforms, and young people and children, which is the scope of today. So going to talking about young people and children, what our aim today in this presentation and what we would like to share today is 3 specific approaches that we implement, that we use when tackling gender-based violence, including teen dating violence in young people, which we hope that will make everyone reflect on their own context and eventually take us as their own, because they are applicable and they are broad approaches that can be implemented. So next, please. So basically, in the initiatives and the projects that we will present today, which are related specifically to gender-based violence and young people, they are based on these three main axes or points. First of all, we look at schools as a place for educating to gender equality as a priority, because a school is basically where young people form their identity, their personality, and they learn about different values such as tolerance, responsibility, self-confidence. So they are early childhood education is the best moment to approach gender equality learning. We also create safe spaces to reflect on issues such as affectivity and positive sexuality. And this in terms of deconstructing gender roles in order to have healthy relationships in terms of affectivity and positive sexuality. And last but not least, in all of these, we transversely ensure young people participation, both directly, so through participatory and child-centered approaches, but also through working with adults, with school teachers, psychologists, educators, so that they can learn the right techniques and the right methods to ensure that they listen to children's voices, specifically in all those subjects in which they are involved. So now I will give the floor to my colleague Francesca, who will start with a brief presentation of the first initiative, the Children First project, and in which she will demonstrate how we apply these approaches.
Thank you, Cloé. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
We hear a little bit of an echo. I don't know if you
now
maybe. Now it's better.
Now it's better. Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting us. It's very a pleasure for us to be here today. And as Cloé was saying, I will go deeply into the first project we wanted to present, which will be, you will see, one of the most significant one, because we were combining in this project not only the fact of educating to gender-based violence as a tool to prevent the violence, educate to gender equality, but also we were applying the approach of doing this by engaging and involving directly young people. So this project was running since last year, so from 2019 to 2021, and it is a project. You can move to the next slide, please. It's a project which was funded by the European Union through a specific program called REC, Rights, Equality and Citizenship, which were really aiming at preventing teen dating violence and school-related gender-based violence through action of education and awareness raising, and also with this active engagement of students. We were focusing on students between 12 and 18 years old. Please, if you can move forward to our approaches. As I was saying, the approach we used is very important and significant here today, because we were starting from the very from the need that we were seeing in our different intervention, the need to involve adolescents in all the issues that concern them. So specifically on this topic and on school-related gender-based violence, most of the tools used for preventing it are following traditional teaching methods. And on the contrary, we wanted to try innovative methods. We were encouraging and activating children's creativity and imagination, also using technology, and also make them participate in all the processes, so giving them also an opportunity to be part of everything was proposed to them as final users. That's why we can present these two main approaches that guided us, which are the bottom-up approach, so starting from the view of young people in order to also plan and design intervention, and also a user-led approach. So for all the development of tools and mechanisms, we were led by their opinions. How we did this? we applied this methodology to several activities that I will very briefly show you in a while. In general, we started from research in order to also assess the very specific needs. And also based on this research, we were creating training programs, but also tools for young people. For instance, a game, an awareness raising campaign on social media, and an artistic contest. But the most innovative part of this project, you can move to the next slide, please, is the fact that we were doing this involving directly young people. Particularly, we were creating in all the countries which were implementing this project, we were creating a youth advisory board. So we tried to create in all countries this board of young consultants. In our case, in Italy, we were creating this in one school, so we involved 18 adolescents between 15 and 18 years old, and we were working with them through the whole length of the project. So for 2 years, we were meeting them. You can go forward, please. They were involved actually in all the phases of the project. So, for instance, in the research phase, we were proposing, they were actually collecting 150 questionnaires among their peers. Also, they were interviewing their peers in order to understand the needs. And also, they were directly analyzing the results. After this first phase, they continued working with us, co-designing the content of the online game. You will see this in a while, but it is based on stories. So they were drafting these stories and also piloting the prototype of the game from a technical point of view. So seeing if it could effectively work for our aims, and also if it could be used by their peers. And finally, they were creating with us an awareness raising campaign on social media, and we were launching together an art contest called Art Against Dating Violence. So we can go deeper in each of the activities I was mentioning. Here you can see how it looks, the online game. It can be downloaded on a smartphone, so it's very easy to be played and also to be downloaded. When you have it on your phone, you have just to select the story you want to play with. So it's a story of one character. For instance, the story of Dora. You can read at it, and then you start playing. At one point of the game, the user is invited to answer to some question which will change the course of the game. And by the very end, you will get an answer which is closer or not to a good way to act for preventing gender-based violence and or recognizing it. Then the second activity I wanted to show you is this awareness raising campaign. As I was saying before, it was co-designed with our consultory board within some co-creation labs. So the idea was to meet them every 2 weeks. In general, all the work we did with the young was through workshop in schools. Last year, particularly, we were meeting every 2 weeks from January to May. There were online workshops because of the pandemic. And we were focusing each workshop on a different team. So we were kind of cutting the macro theme of gender-based violence among young people in several different subtopics. And then each time we were analyzing one topic specifically and try to collect key messages that must be included in our campaigns on Instagram and Facebook in the following days. Here you can see just an example of our co-creation lab. As I said, it was in the end it was done online. Using interactive tools, for instance, Jamboard, we were collecting ideas. Here, unfortunately, it's in Italian, but it's just an example to see how we were working on stereotypes, for instance. So each of us were giving its own understanding of this, and based on this, in the next slide, you can see some of the posts we were publishing. The first group is on the subtopic of homo, lesbian, bi, transphobia last May. And then the second one is about sexism, toxic masculinity, and rape culture. So this is just to give you a very practical idea of the processes we were collecting within this activity. The very last activities we did is this art contest, which was launched in March last year. It was addressed to adolescents from 12 to 18 years old all around the world. And the aim of what we were asking them was to reflect their understanding of a relationship free from gender-based violence and stereotypes, and representing it through under 3 categories: images, videos, and text. And in the end, it was a success. We received many artworks from very different countries, from 7 different countries, and we were able to collect all of them in our website, creating a beautiful online gallery. So this was just to give you an idea of an application where everything we have done was really co-created with young people, and we can say that the results were excellent, and this approach will be reused and reapplied on other interventions. And now I can give the floor to my colleague Cloé again, as she will present another intervention focused on sex education.
Thanks, Francesca. I will move forwards with the ISEX project, which focuses actually, because it's still running, in implementing a model of comprehensive sexuality education for school empowerment in different countries. This is a project that is still running until 2023. So why ISEX, and why was this project conceived, and why is sex education in a comprehensive way, in a comprehensive approach, important for young people to tackle gender-based violence? Basically and mainly, we have identified that in students aged 11, 18, so through young people and in young people and teenagers, there is a need to support both them, but also families, teachers, and educators. Again, a school being the first place where young people learn a set of skills and values, and the need for them to acquire different skills to approach relationships and sexuality from the early age. This done in a comprehensive way. So we're not here talking about only a medical perspective or a psychological perspective, but based on natural, open, and joyful communication of sex education. That is why we call it comprehensive, and that is why it is comprehensive. So what is specifically the approach that we are using within the iSex project or intervention? And why we have decided to do so? It is because, as we all are very aware of, we live today in a very highly sexualized world with television and social media, which communicates and conveys a series of stereotypes and expectations in young people, in which the depiction of cases of gender-based violence and violence in general give quite a lot of mixed messages about relationships and sexuality, pornography, etc., which form young people in a way to have certain expectations and standards of behavior. So this is why different holistic tools are needed to tackle this very, very serious and current problem. And that is why through the iSex project, we have put together different aspects, including psychosocial aspects, the body, rights, opportunities, consent, responsible attitudes together to fight gender-based violence and promote a healthy development of social emotional skills in young people, in this case, in schools specifically. So what we have done is at a first level, approaching adults, so teachers, school staff, educators, psychologists, and children's families, in order to later on, once the basis is strong, go directly to young people. Because as we know, it is very related. And that is why during this project and within this project, we have taken an intergenerational approach, because we understand the influence one generation and the differences between one generation and the other in the conception and perception of concepts related to health, relationships, and sexuality. But we have also taken into consideration the intercultural approach, because as you might be aware, in different cultural backgrounds, religious background, even within the same country or the same city, there might be different cultural traditions. They might change the perspective of the way that these issues, such as relationships and sexuality, are conceived. And hence it is very, very important that the people and the adults, the educators, the families that approach these delicate topics with young people are aware of their cultural lenses. And last but not least, a gender-sensitive approach. As a gender-sensitive approach, because as you are very well aware, today young people are very conscious of gender differences. There are different types of gender identities, and they all have a very important role in how both students or young people perceive themselves and their sexuality and their relations with their peers, but also how teachers and parents can or cannot, so have the capability or not, to address these issues with young people. And be respectful of their gender identities and different needs. Next, please. So just very briefly, to give you an overview of how we are moving forward with this intervention. We have created, or we are in the process of creating, a book of love of generations, which are the different videos based on intergenerational dialogue about sexuality, body image, relationships, and love. So we took students, parents, grandparents, and put them together talking about these issues. So it's going to be quite an interesting result. Then we are in the process of conducting a teacher's training on comprehensive sex education and giving them a precise curriculum with methods and activities to implement, to first they gain consciousness and then being able to pilot that with young people. We're going to mentor them through this process. So the process of doing and implementing the sex ed across culture curriculum. Then we will also have all these materials and video lessons and the curriculum for teachers and activities for young people in an online platform so that it can be accessible to everyone and of course to all of the present people here today if you wish to look at it. And last but not least, we're going to be developing two awareness raising or dissemination actions in a way, which is a white paper for policy recommendations, because we all know the very big hole and emptiness there is at a policymaking level in terms of comprehensive sexuality education, even if young people have many times expressed the need and curiosity to learn about these things and to experience these things. And last but not least, we are having different training activities and events for awareness raising with everyone. So families, young people, and teachers all put together, because we do believe that participatory approaches and open approaches to these topics are very important in order to overcome taboos and what we call the elephant in the room, right, of sex education as the only viable way to tackle gender-based violence. And I think I am finished with the I6 project. Can we move forward with the slides? Yes, so just the last thing very shortly. I hope that you are not overwhelmed with all of this information. Francesca again is going to present a last type of intervention. They're all related, but they all have different particularities and specificities. And this is the Reboot Now project, which is even more specific than the other two, because in this case, we are this year starting with a new interventional model to prevent gender-based violence in schools after lockdown. So after, and this is the relevant part, after COVID-19 lockdown and all the incredible and big consequence this has had in the development of young people. So the floor is yours, Francesca.
Thank you, Cloé. So I will try to be very, I will go straight to the point in this, because as you were saying, this intervention is a new one and can be interesting because it's focusing specifically on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the project started this month, so it's a very new one, but we wanted to present it because we were really starting from as a starting point. We had this need to support young people in recovery from all the difficulties they were facing because of the pandemic. And you can please move to the next slide. Yeah, we are trying to do this, and we designed this new intervention based on the support of well-being and mental health. It's again a project funded by the European Union. Thank you. Starting from the needs, here we cannot show you the results of the project because it just started, but it is very important to point out what was our starting point. So we were in a period where many data were presented. showing a picture in which minors were, even though they were not facing a high risk of contracting COVID compared to the other age groups, they were disproportionately hit by the pandemic. And particularly adolescents were facing different threats because of the pandemic itself, but also because of the interruption of essential services, rising poverty and inequalities, and everything had a huge impact on their mental health. And the second point is also that we were observing in Europe, but I think that the situation was global, that gender-based violence was increasing everywhere during lockdowns. And also in the meanwhile, violence was increasing, and the effort that we were doing until that moment were mined by the fact of interrupting all the prevention and protection services, also the care services, and also adolescents in particular. They were much more exposed to violence, even online and offline in their families. So what we propose and what we are starting to implement is an evidence-based service. So this time we will propose a very concrete support service, always trying to have the young people involved in the activities we propose for them again, and also combining activities which are aimed at building capacities of professionals working with young people. And also another innovative aspect is that we think that all the professionals that in different ways will work on this service can have must have a chance to exchange their expertise at European level at least. So going very shortly into the intervention we are planning. So the core of the project will be the creation of itinerant school counseling desk for students, but also for their families, for teachers and school staff. So it is itinerant in the sense that in each country, for instance, here in Palermo, we will create an itinerant desk service, which will be in rotation running in several schools. In parallel to this, there will be other activities. For instance, everything will also be online because we will create a platform. We're collecting all information about the desk service, also how to access it, how to take an appointment, but also we will upload them all the materials we may have from the other project or intervention we did in the past. Also, I was saying it is important for us to make professionals sharing their experience. So we will create international workshop and platform for professionals to exchange, to learn from the other experience, and to focus on good practices. And here too, we will run awareness raising campaigns, organizing events, for instance, this well-being festival in schools, and this is really for at a broader level to try to raise awareness to the general public in the school, but in general also outside. And finally, as we consider this itinerant desk as a pilot intervention, that of course we hope that everything will be a success, but that's why we want to propose it also to learn from this experience in order that the experience will be repeated in the same or in different schools and taken, transferred to public or other institutions. So we will also, by the very end of the project, we will work a bit on this through other meetings and events, more on policy making level. This is all for Reboot now. I hope that it was not too much information, but please ask questions and we will be very happy to give you more information about all the product, the intervention we were mentioning. Thank you very much.
And I am not going to wait any longer to present our last presenters for today. And we've been talking about prevention, and we also wanted to have some insight into work with perpetrators of violence, young perpetrators. So we invited Esteban Eugenio Esquivel and Fernando Gallegos, both from Mexico, and they will be talking about this topic. So Esteban will start, and he's an associate professor of psychology in the Department of Social Sciences at the Autonomous University of Juárez in Mexico. He obtained his Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico and his PhD in Psychology from the University of Birmingham in the UK. His research interests include the study of aggression or violence and associated mental health risk factors. He's a member of the National Researchers System in Mexico and an editorial board member at the Journal of Aggression, Maltreatment, and Trauma, and the Journal of Child and Adolescence Trauma as well. And he's associate editor at Partner Abuse. So, well, I will also introduce Fernando, who is director at Jaguares, Jóvenes de Bien in Ciudad, Juárez, in Mexico. He has a degree in business administration from the Instituto Tecnológico Ciudad, Juárez. And currently he leads Jaguares, Jóvenes de Bien, which is an organization that was formed in 2011. And since then, Jaguares is dedicated to the developing projects to work for the community and prevent violence and crime. And to date, they have benefited more than 15,000 children, youth, and adults from 5 municipalities of the state of Chihuahua. So welcome to Esteban and Fernando. Thank you so much for being here. And you can go ahead and start. I will share your presentation in a moment.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Anna, for the brilliant introduction. Not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just wait for, I can probably, let me see if I can share it here. Okay, so there
you should be able to see the screen now.
Okay. Yep. Fine. So, well, since my presentation, my brief participation intends to serve as the foundation to Fernando's talk about their intervention, the intervention they are currently conducting here in Juárez. Rather than speaking in terms of broadly in terms of gender-based violence, I'm addressing this presentation in terms of partner abuse and dating violence and family violence. You may switch to the next slide, please. Yep. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, so I'll start off by saying that there is a comprehensive body of scientific evidence. Can you turn to the previous one, please? Thank you. a comprehensive body of scientific evidence documenting when we talk about perpetrators of interpersonal violence, and particularly about dating violence and partner abuse. There is quite a well-established consensus on the heterogeneity of perpetrators of this type of violence. Next slide, please. Most of research, typological research, has identified roughly 3 to 4 types of perpetrators with different, very specific profiles, very specific treatment needs, right? In terms of mental health conditions, in terms of behavioral patterns, dyadic patterns. And so all of this body of evidence has given way to create interventions that are more tailored, more specific for perpetrators. Next slide, please. Right, so most of the empirical research on interpersonal violence and partner abuse has identified a wide array of risk factors. Most of them, as some of my colleagues started today the event, talked about, many of these risk factors have to do with early exposure to violence contexts, be it within the family or outside the family, problems with substance abuse, socioeconomic stressors. There's a wide variety of risk factors. Among the most impactful are the ones that I'm showing to you that were just compiled from a recent meta-analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly mention, talk about some of the preliminary results we got from the study intervention we are conducting here in northern Mexico with Jaguares. Next slide, please. As we can see, when we talk about perpetrators of family violence, partner abuse, it's the data, the preliminary data we have is consistent with what other studies have found in terms of finding a wide array of conditions, of mental health conditions that these perpetrators usually have in terms of anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms, and also in terms of behavioral patterns. So next slide, please. Okay, so our analysis included, we ran analysis taking into account socio-demographic predictors. And of interest for this presentation was the fact that actually the factor of age, being younger, was a very strong predictor of any kind of being just a perpetrator, be it of a perpetrator of gender-based violence, usually known as intimate terrorists, or a perpetrator of any other kind of violence, situational violence, for instance. This was consistent. This was a consistent finding, and it's also consistent with the scientific literature. Next slide, please. Right. So these preliminary findings, along with the literature, the review of the literature, and some and continental surveys we have conducted, colleagues of mine and myself have conducted in Latin America and in Northern America, Canada, the US, has led us to, well, within those surveys, we actually ask service providers to tell us, based on their experience, on their clinical experience with perpetrators, to tell us what they would suggest, what were the standards they would deem appropriate to work with interventions for perpetrators. And most of them, agreed on the fact that they recommend risk assessments to be conducted as a standard procedure to identify specific types of perpetrators, be it perpetrators of gender-based violence or perpetrators of other types of violence, situational violence, or what we call situational couple violence, to ensure a more tailored, specific intervention or treatment to reduce this maladaptive behavior, and in general, also to improve or to decrease program dropout. In some cases, program dropout seems to be a concern for service providers in some of these countries. And so by doing this, we can ensure interventions more suitable for these perpetrators, considering the degree of risk for present and future victims. Next slide, please. The Association of Domestic Violence Intervention Programs is it's a group of researchers and clinicians, service providers around the world, and they have basically dedicated part of their time to identify research and the best practices, evidence-based practices with perpetrators of interpersonal violence. And these are some of the suggestions or standards they've issued in their website, and most of and all of them, I would say, are in line with what my previous colleagues have mentioned in terms of providing specific treatments, interventions for perpetrators. An important focus would be on creating bonds or liaisons between academia and service providers to have evidence-based interventions. So on my end, I would just give the floor to Fernando for him to explain to us, talk about the interventions he's currently developing here in Juárez, Mexico, with Jaguares. Thank you.
Muy bien, buen día a todos. Muchas gracias por permitirme compartir esta experiencia de nuestra organización en Ciudad Juárez, Jaguares Jóvenes de Bien. Les voy a hablar un poco acerca de este proyecto que hemos estado trabajando que se llama Reconstruyéndome, que es un modelo de atención cognitivo-conductual focalizada a generadores de violencia intrafamiliar en conflicto con la ley. Siguiente, por favor. Este modelo es un proyecto que hemos estado trabajando desde el 2018. Nuestra organización fue constituida en el 2011 y desde en este año 2021 tuvimos la oportunidad de atender a 914 personas, hombres y mujeres, que tuvieron un conflicto con la ley por el tema de violencia familiar o de pareja. Lo trabajamos en alrededor de 5 municipios del estado de Chihuahua, en Cuauhtémoc, Parral, Delicias, en Chihuahua capital y Ciudad Juárez. Ahí es en esos 5 municipios donde estamos trabajando este proyecto. Siguiente, por favor. Este proyecto hemos realizado mediciones con instrumentos pre y post y hemos encontrado que ha desarrollado resultados favorables, disminuyendo la ansiedad, la ira, aumentando el control interno y el control externo, estas capacidades para poder controlar y expresar sus emociones, y disminuye la violencia sufrida y la violencia que ejercen los perpetradores de violencia. Siguiente, por favor. Para dar un poco de contexto, en la situación que vivimos aquí en el estado de Chihuahua, quisiera compartirles unas estadísticas muy breves. Desgraciadamente en Chihuahua, en el estado de Chihuahua, tiene dos de sus ciudades se encuentran dentro del ranking de las 50 ciudades más violentas, siendo Chihuahua capital la número 30 y Ciudad Juárez la número 6 de crimen y violencia. También otro detalle es de que el 75% de las mujeres se siente insegura en Ciudad Juárez. En el municipio de Delicias ocupó el 4º lugar en violencia familiar a nivel estatal, teniendo, solo para que se den una idea, hasta 287 incidentes por cada 100,000 habitantes. En la ciudad de Cuauhtémoc se encontró a 2º nivel nacional en feminicidios, desgraciadamente con una tasa de 6.3 por cada 100,000 mujeres. Otro detalle también es que el 67% de las mujeres en Chihuahua se identificó que sufrían algún tipo de violencia, ya sea psicológica, verbal, física, etc. Y también para darnos una idea del número de grado de violencia familiar que se sufre en Ciudad Juárez, solo en un análisis que se hizo de enero a junio del 2021, se reportaron 3,284 denuncias por violencia familiar, ¿no? Desgraciadamente de estas se procesan o menos del 10% llegan a un tribunal. Entonces, sí es un problema fuerte el que tenemos con el tema de la violencia. Me comentan por ahí que no se escucha, no sé si es en el tema, en mi exposición en español o en la traducción de inglés. Ah, muy bien, me comentan que sí se escuchan ambas. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, y yo ahorita lo que quiero compartir, o en lo que me quiero enfocar de este modelo que hemos trabajado, es como algunas estrategias que sentimos que a nuestra organización le han sido útiles, porque a pesar de ser una organización pequeña o mediana, hemos logrado extendernos territorialmente al menos en 5 municipios de nuestro estado, ¿no? Entonces, yo quisiera compartir con ustedes algunas estrategias que consideramos que han hecho fuerte a nuestro modelo y que quizás pudieran servir estas experiencias para otros modelos que se implementen, ¿no? Como buenas prácticas. Primero que nada, lo primero, nuestro primer paso fue generar una alianza con especialistas para el desarrollo de la metodología, ¿no? Yo creo que es la parte principal. Obviamente se requiere ser especialista en los temas que se vayan a abordar. Si no somos especialistas, es importante buscar acercarnos a la academia. En este caso, nosotros hicimos colaboración con 4 doctores en psicología de la Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez, los cuales nos ayudaron a desarrollar toda la metodología, ¿no? Los instrumentos de evaluación, el contenido temático, la orientación metodológica, incluso la evaluación posterior al proyecto para saber si tiene algún tipo de impacto, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, es importante generar alianzas con la academia, con especialistas, para poder que pueda tener un mayor impacto en nuestro proyecto. Lo segundo es desarrollar una metodología con base a evidencia. Obviamente, cuando nosotros nos acercamos con los expertos, ellos nos hablan acerca de la literatura, los metaanálisis, las diferentes experiencias que ya se manejan en otros lados del mundo, y nosotros encontramos que uno de los enfoques que tenía más evidencia de éxito era el cognitivo-conductual, ¿no? Obviamente con perspectiva de género. Sin embargo, vemos que sale muy bueno, muy alto, con muy buenos referentes en este sentido, y es por eso que nosotros optamos por trabajar el cognitivo-conductual como una metodología o como un enfoque para trabajar con ofensores de violencia familiar. El tercer punto es capacitación y seguimiento al personal terapéutico. También es importante, obviamente, los terapeutas que trabajan con los ofensores, es importante, ellos traen una carrera, tienen una formación, pero es sumamente importante darles una capacitación en el enfoque que se tiene que trabajar, en la orientación metodológica, y sobre todo también es importante darles un acompañamiento y seguimiento durante todo el proyecto, ¿no? Nosotros tenemos algunos instrumentos de seguimiento donde podemos ver si se va generando un apego o no al proceso terapéutico o al manual de trabajo. Nuestras primeras experiencias nos dábamos cuenta de que cada terapeuta tiene su enfoque y su manera de trabajar, entonces no existía mucho apego. Entonces, conforme fuimos dando nosotros seguimiento y acompañamiento, no solo una capacitación, vimos que se fue generando un mayor apego a nuestro manual de trabajo y por consiguiente obteníamos mejores resultados. Siguiente, por favor. Ok, el cuarto punto tiene que ver con alianza con fundaciones o financiadores para ofrecer el servicio gratuito. Este servicio que nosotros damos de atención a ofensores es algo que damos de manera gratuita como asociación civil, y es posible gracias a un apoyo que nos ha dado una fundación formada por empresarios del estado de Chihuahua que trabajan en el tema de la prevención de la violencia. Sin eso no hubiera sido posible poder hacer este trabajo tan extenso, y es por eso que es importante como organización generar este tipo de alianzas que tengan la visión de desarrollar una prevención de la violencia, ¿no? Lo otro es generar alianzas con instituciones de administración y procuración de justicia. Esto también es muy importante. El tipo de ofensores o agresores que nosotros atendemos de violencia familiar, de pareja y de género, todos ellos ya vienen procesados por algún tipo de delito de violencia familiar. Puede ser en diferente nivel, en seguridad pública, nosotros lo conocemos como la policía municipal, puede ser en fiscalía, donde ya se genera la investigación, o puede ser en un tribunal, donde ya se está dictando algún tipo de sentencia por el delito. Entonces, a nosotros ya nos llegan estos usuarios en conflicto con la ley en cualquiera de cualquiera de estos niveles. Por lo tanto, es importante generar alianzas con ellos para que se pueda generar esta canalización, porque evidentemente por ser el proceso, este trabajo ellos acuden de manera obligatoria por el tipo de servicio que tienen que cubrir, ¿no? Es decir, es una imposición que les aplica el juez o que les aplica fiscalía o alguna otra institución, en este caso como aquí lo conocemos, Subprocuraduría de la Defensa de las Niñas, Niños y Adolescentes, que es una institución estatal que protege los derechos de los niños y por lo tanto está velando por ellos, y si identifica que alguna familia está abusando de algún menor, cometiendo algún tipo de violencia, pues lo retiran y le imponen una sanción. Y dentro de esta sanción incluye tener un tipo de acompañamiento terapéutico de parentalidad o con otras habilidades para poder que pueda recuperar a su niño. Entonces es importante este tipo de alianzas. Y el otro punto es supervisión y seguimiento de los casos de atención. Esto es sumamente importante. No basta nada más con darles terapia o canalizarlos para que reciban su acompañamiento terapéutico. Ya existen por ahí algunos estudios y se menciona que entre a mayor sea el seguimiento y la supervisión, más probabilidades existen de que el usuario pueda concluir su proceso, se pueda extender. Entonces nosotros tenemos un equipo de supervisión y seguimiento que va de manera individual dándole seguimiento a los casos. Siguiente, por favor. Una antes, por favor. Dos antes, por favor. La que hacia abajo. Muy bien. El otro punto tiene que ver con el diagnóstico clínico antes y después de concluir el proceso. Aquí ya es propiamente lo que nosotros manejamos en la intervención. Nuestras sesiones pueden ir desde 15 hasta 35 sesiones según sea el nivel de violencia que se está identificando o según sea el caso que estamos atendiendo. Pero para eso es importante generar un diagnóstico. Nosotros aplicamos alrededor de 360 ítems donde medimos depresión, ideación suicida, control de ira, ansiedad, autoestima, algunos otros factores de riesgo vinculados a la violencia como el alcoholismo, la violencia sufrida y ejercida, los celos. Entonces sí tenemos algunos instrumentos de medición algo extensos que nos permiten generar un diagnóstico del paciente que estamos nosotros atendiendo, ¿no? Para poder, en este sentido, tener más claro el trabajo que se tiene que realizar. Y obviamente que después del tratamiento se vuelve a aplicar estos instrumentos para ver si se generó un avance y que nos permita a nosotros tener herramientas para poder entregar una carta de liberación que se entrega al juez o a la institución que nos derivó el caso. El otro punto tiene que ver con la intervención individual y grupal, que también es muy recomendado. En algunos casos de atención a ofensores solo existen en modalidad grupal. En nuestra experiencia hemos visto que tiene mucho mayor impacto cuando se trabaja de manera individual o ambas, ¿no? Porque de manera individual puedes identificar tú el nivel de violencia, puedes identificar también la retroalimentación que te dan los usuarios, ¿no? Entonces es más fácil para el terapeuta analizar si está existiendo un avance o no. Y como hemos visto, pues es muy importante atender estos casos que se pueden convertir en feminicidios, ¿no? Entonces, por eso es importante, y lo vemos nosotros como una buena práctica, el atender de manera individual y grupal. Y por último, pues la medición del proceso terapéutico pre y post, ¿no? Que es esto que comentamos, que al final del proyecto tenemos que observar si existe un avance, tenemos que medir, ¿no? De alguna manera, tenemos un dicho acá en México, en Juárez, ¿no? De que si hay algo que no se mide, pues no sabes si sirve, ¿no? O si funciona. Entonces, es importante generar una medición del proceso para poder ver qué tanto está haciendo el resultado. Aquí tenemos un ejemplo de una medición que tuvimos del 2019 al 2020 de manera interna, donde veíamos, por ejemplo, que el IRA de control externo habíamos encontrado cambios significativos muy grandes en los ítems como trato de relajarme o ardo de enojo por dentro aunque lo demuestre, y veamos que ya existía un cambio, es decir, el usuario aprendía a expresar su enojo de una manera positiva o pensaban en algo agradable para tranquilizarlo, ¿no? Todo esto proveniente de las diferentes estrategias y contenido que nosotros les impartíamos a los ofensores para que tuvieran herramientas y habilidades, como comentaba la doctora en nuestra primera exposición, que es importante darles herramientas para que puedan ellos defenderse, ¿no? Entonces, que puedan afrontar las diferentes situaciones que los lleven a cometer la violencia. Entonces, estas son 9 puntos, yo creo que muy concretos que nosotros hemos encontrado que podrían funcionar, yo creo, en cualquier proyecto que desee implementarse con esta temática. Por mi parte sería todo, no sé si existe alguna duda. Muchas gracias.
Please, everyone, go back to the original setting. We will be hosting the Q&A session in English with interpretation, but you may ask the questions in any language and we will translate, okay? So, thank you so much, Fernando. Muchísimas gracias, Fernando, por tu presentación. I'm very excited to learn about perpetrator programs and how they can be effective, as your results seem very, very good. Okay, so we will go to the Q&A session and comments session. You may raise your hand. I know there are some comments and questions on the chat. I'm going to try to review those, but in the meanwhile, whoever has a question can go ahead and raise their hands. I see in the chat that Ludmil is saying that she would love to talk with Heidi as a Fulbright scholar because she's preparing for candidature. And she is asking if it would be possible to pursue studies in gender, etc. I think maybe we can, Heidi, if it's okay, we can get you in touch with Ludmil, who is one of the coordinators in our program in Haiti. And maybe you can have, yeah, that's your email. Thank you. You can have that conversation yourself. Awesome. I know Matthew was commenting on the difficulties of implementing activities in the schools because at least in the Bahamas, it takes a long time to get approval and they have to review everything, right, Matthew? Do you want to expand on it? I'm trying to find your comment, but you are free to, there you go. You can go ahead and talk.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just wanted to extend a thanks to all the panelists, a tremendous amount of information and really solid work that is going on. My point really was in the midst of Dr. Luft's point presentation that as you talk about school-based interventions being some of the most effective, unfortunately, given the context in many of our countries, schools are really at the they're at the tail end of what a national attitude might be able to drive. So we have built into some of our laws and cultures built concepts of gender inequity, whether it be actual legal inequality or things that permeate in our society. And so getting curriculums and resources and programs into the school systems, the public school systems particularly, can be very difficult because of the pathway that has to be gone through. You have to get things approved at a ministerial level. They have to be reviewed and seen through cabinet. They end up having to be go through the scrutiny of unions and school personnel before they would actually hit in effect. So in many instances, what I think as ways we move forward with these points in a very timely way, that civil society, not-for-profits, faith-based organizations targeting the same youth groups might be more timely and nimble in terms of carrying forward some of the current programs and program models. They're not as bound to some of the same regulations. They are limited in terms of their access because they don't have a captured audience of the students every single day, all week. But I still think that they can be the ones to drive and push the needle a bit more, maybe assertively or target more marginalized groups more effectively than maybe the schools, which haven't been as responsive in my instance.
Thank you, Matthew. We're going to give a moment for the interpreters to translate the comment. And I don't know if Heidi wants to share briefly how, if that's the experience in the Dominican Republic. I believe it is. It also takes a long time here to get approval for anything in the government.
You can let me know when you're ready for me to respond.
Melissa and Saira, please write in the chat when you're done with the interpretation. Okay, yeah, you can go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment, Matt. So what you're saying, I think, has a lot of truth. It is, schools are great for reach and for sustainability, because in a lot of my formative research, what we've learned, and even when we spoke with the Ministry of Education here in the Dominican Republic, and a lot of the organizations and community stakeholders that we spoke with, they're really, what's the word in English, disillusioned by the progress that's been made so far, which has been very limited, because a lot of this work has been left to community organizations, and it's often very limited, and the reach is not very far. The reach meaning the amount of adolescents that they're able to impact. And on top of that, the sustainability is very poor. As soon as funds run out, these programs usually end, or there's just not a lot of planning for sustainability. So schools are great in terms of reaching a large number of adolescents. Yes, of course, as you mentioned, we won't reach all of them, particularly maybe some of the most vulnerable to violence, who are not attending school or unable to attend school for whatever reason. But, you know, we might hope that there may be some trickle down effect from what adolescents in schools are learning. And for those vulnerable communities, particularly here in the Dominican Republic, our community stakeholders have shared that if we want to reach Haitian adolescents who are living in the Dominican Republic, schools is not the platform to do that, because many of them don't attend school or are unable to attend school due to various factors, including political reasons and climates. So yes, and I would also say my experience with the Ministry of Education, because you are very right, here in the Dominican Republic, you can't do anything in public schools unless you have the blessing of the Ministry of Education. And so one of the things that we've been doing since we began this program of research is we've been collaborating with the Ministry of Education to develop that relationship and develop their buy-in and make sure that they know that they are an integral part of this. So we actually, we've got their buy-in, we've gotten letters, we've met with the directors, and we actually just submitted a grant together to the National Institutes of Health in the United States to do this pilot study. And in that letter, they also agreed to, if we receive this grant, to continue collaborating with us beyond just this pilot test of the adapted intervention and into a large scale implementation and dissemination study of the intervention throughout multiple provinces with a larger number of schools. So I think it can be complicated, but I think if you go about it in a very strategic way try to wiggle yourself into those spaces and build trust and allyship, and involve the ministries of education, I think it can be done. And I personally think that if we're talking about making a change with adolescents, a large scale change, it has to be a combination between schools and families, but to really get the reach and sustainability that we need in order to make a significant change in these in violence outcomes, it really, I think, for adolescents needs to be done through the schools predominantly, and then additional side programs to reach some of the more vulnerable groups.
Thank you, Heidi. Johnny, you can participate now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have one question for the first panelist. I think it's Aidu. I don't catch the name well, but I believe it's Dr. Aidu. In your presentation, at the beginning, you mentioned that there are three countries in the region that are more impacted by domestic violence. So you only mentioned Dominican Republic. I'm quite, I would like to know exactly what are the other countries, the two other countries. And also, you didn't mention anything relating to policies, how to fight against domestic-based violence using a policy cycle. I would like to know if you also focus on this aspect. Thank you.
Any of the panelists would like to respond?
Hannah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I as far as I understood, it was for the first intervention, right? About Dominican Republic.
That's what I thought too, yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
Sure. So the question was to understand more about other countries within the Caribbean and also policy changes. Is that correct? Just so I can be sure that I'm responding correctly.
Yes, I think so. So you're in other countries and also the part about policy.
Yes. So in terms of the part about policy, I think, as we know, research is so important for driving policy change. And the ideal would be that we're able to eventually develop evidence from our research to inform policy changes. For example, my work, our goal is really to be able to change required courses, which is a lofty goal, but if you don't try, you have no chance of getting there, right? So our goal is to really create a set of evidence-based guidelines that can then inform government decisions about policies regarding required coursework in these countries. And also, one of the challenges, as I'm sure you're aware of, a lot of us are aware of, in the Caribbean and Latin America, and really globally, is that policies exist and they are necessary to drive and maintain long-term change. However, at least in the Dominican Republic, implementation of those policies is lacking. Consistent or full application of those policies is lacking. So one example is that just recently, in 2021, the Dominican Republic finally outlawed child marriage, which is wonderful, that it's now finally illegal. However, that only is applied to legal marriages. And as we know, a lot of child marriages, at least in the Dominican Republic, and I would imagine throughout other countries in the world, are more informal, right? So that's a policy that is somewhat effective, but also people have to be willing to report these, to report and punish, right? These types of behaviors. And so policy can be very complicated in these settings, and carry through. So I think that's where dissemination and implementation science is, like, I really believe one of it should be a key focus of all of the work that we're doing at whatever level it is, whether it's at the individual, the community, the policy level, because one of the hardest things is knowing how to actually make policies or programs be effectively put in place and maintained. So I hope that answers your question slightly about policy. I would say in terms of other countries outside of the Dominican Republic, I can speak mostly about the Dominican Republic because that's what I focus most of my research on, but I know the rates, as in that initial map that I showed in my presentation, it showed the other countries that have similar priorities for prevention of violence and injury and adolescent pregnancy, and that it was most of Latin America. In some countries, like in northeastern Europe, it looked like the Dominican Republic is the only country that has seen a significant increase in physical partner violence. However, there are still other countries. I think Belize has the highest rates of partner violence, though they're not significantly moving in one direction or the other. So I don't know if there's other individuals on the panel or in the audience even who might have more information about other countries, or if you could clarify what information you're wondering about specifically with respect to other countries so we could better answer.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for this clarification. I think you provide lots of information. Because I was wondering about Haiti, because Haiti is really close to the Dominican Republic as they share borders. And if this situation also is studied, or if there are some data regarding this, I was a bit concerned to know about it. And also regarding the policy explanation that you provide, I think it's really great that you mentioned also you partner with the Minister of Education. But I wonder also if this evidence-based studies not also put in place at policy makers, because they are the ones who really provide or create policies. And if you also partner with policymakers, and if so, if you could provide some explanation, because I really would like to know how this work with this findings and science and policies, and how can they work together to better address this issue of domestic violence.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. So Haiti and the Dominican Republic are, I know if I recall a recent publication, so.
Haiti, sorry to interrupt. Can we
Yep, that's fine.
for the interpretation? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yep, thank you. Yes, thank you. So very, very, very good point about Haiti, as they are the Dominican Republic's neighbor. And in a recent publication where they reviewed the national level data across the Americas on violence, Haiti was included in that. And they also, so the Dominican Republic has seen increases in past year physical violence, and Haiti is the only to see increase in lifetime physical violence. So those really are the two countries that are, I guess, in situations that are changing for the worse, according to data. And it's important when we talk about the Dominican Republic to talk about Haiti, because not only are they neighbors, but there's a lot of immigration from Haiti to the DR. I have primarily focused on Dominicans, but I will say that I did speak with one organization that that serves predominantly Haitian immigrants in the Dominican Republic, and it seems like definitely there are different considerations when it comes to partner violence that are different for Haitian culture versus Dominican culture. On average, obviously there are subcultures within both of those, but it is harder also, from what I've heard and what I've experienced, because I tried to put together a study that focused specifically on Haitian adolescents in the Dominican Republic, and it was so hard to get that off the ground. We actually haven't been able to yet. So I think there's not very much data in the DR either, but I think there's even less on Haiti, and it's definitely an area that needs to be investigated with people who have more expertise and experience and closeness with that community than I do, or something that I should work on over the next couple of decades. So sorry I don't have more information about Haiti, aside from the fact that yes, it is a problem there as well, and there is a huge need for further research and researchers who are able to develop trusting relationships with those communities in the DR and in Haiti to be able to collect that data and inform interventions. In terms of policy, the Ministry of Education they decide what policies, they decide on school policy. So I'm working with one of the multiple direcciones offices, the psychology and counseling office within the Ministry of Education. And we know that this is just the first step, but we have to develop more research and more information before we take it up to like the overall director of the Ministry of Education and the other kind of sub-institutions, as Matt was mentioning, who would be doing the voting on making these policy changes to make it an official course. So in terms of school policy, that's our aim, and I think we're on the right road to get there. I don't know how that works in other countries, but that's my experience so far in the DR. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, so much. I have a question. I've seen several different ages in the interventions that you've presented. What would you, and you, I mean all the panelists, say is too early to start addressing gender-based violence with children, and also what's too late in terms of age? Because we always get a very strong debate about what people think is appropriate is not appropriate. So what do you think?
I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'll let some other people respond to that. And if later I can add some comment.
Sure, Francesca.
Yeah, please, Anna, can you repeat, because I have a problem with audio.
Sure. I was asking, what do you think, or what does evidence say about what is too early to start doing gender-based violence prevention with kids in terms of age, and what would be too late?
Actually, I cannot talk about evidence and showing data about this, but our experience suggests that the sooner is the better, and also that there are very different ways to do this. Sometimes also the wording and how we approach this topic. So of course, talking about violence with very young kids, it's not the approach we use. But on the contrary, when we do intervention with, I don't know, 19 years old adolescents, we set our intervention and also the activities we propose very differently. This is very important, of course. For instance, we didn't mention some of our intervention that we do about child sexual abuse. In that case, when we work with young kids, we don't use this the word, but we arrive to the same topics. I mean, the results will be the same, but approaching the problem and the need, talking about intimacy, about consent, about all the subtopics we were mentioning before. And also let me say that we were showing you several examples in our presentation about in the different projects. That involvement was on an age group of 16, 70 years old adolescents. So this is very important to be clarified, because the same action cannot be done with younger children.
Thank you. I have another question. We've talked about the importance of having long-term interventions. So is there anyone has any experience or evidence about what's the ideal length of a gender-based violence prevention intervention with youth? Because we get many project proposals and they're very different from each other. And some of them have longer term interventions and some of them are just like one-off activities. So is there an ideal or range of ideal in the length of the interventions?
Yes, I can start answering to this and then leave the floor to the other colleagues. In our case, the length of intervention is very much linked to the project duration. But in general, I can say that we try to propose at least when we work for school or with school, for instance, we try to propose 1 year long intervention, which is based on several different activities to be done on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, but in general, not just single intervention. I stop here. I also the others.
Thank you, Francesca. Heidi, do you want to add to any of those questions Or Fernando?
Yeah. I would agree with Francesca. I think a year is good, but also according to the CDC, they're really actually proposing that their new model called Dating Matters is something that is proposing that these interventions should not even just be 1 year. They should be ongoing. So, for example, you would maybe offer your first year-long intervention in 6th grade, and that would be age appropriate for 6th graders. And then in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, all the way through high school, this is in an ideal world. Obviously, this takes a lot of resources and would probably take it would be a very involved project, but my understanding is that best practice is that it should be something that is even repetitively offered over the very long term to reinforce these messages and build upon messages each year to be more in depth and have them be age appropriate. I would also say in terms of age, yes, these topics need to be addressed differently for different ages. Our formative research, we did a survey with adolescents from 10 to 19 years old, and the vast majority of them were in relationships, even the younger ones. And so that tells me that, yes, those relationships may look different when they're younger, but they're already in a context where this type of violence can happen. And and particularly in the Dominican Republic, we found that almost 70% of our adolescents reported having experienced physical child abuse. And so many of these children are not growing up with ideas or guidance on what healthy relationships look like. So maybe, we haven't had the sample size yet to determine the age of onset of violence in the Dominican Republic, but I know that other research says it's between, I believe 14 to 16 if somebody else wants to verify that, and it becomes most intense around 17 or 18. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the earlier the better it would be, but obviously addressing it differently in a way that's appropriate for each age group.
Thank you. And if no one else has questions, I have just one final question for Fernando, and you may respond in Spanish. That's probably fine. I can translate. And so you said that the perpetrators that come to your program are referred by the authorities. So I don't know if you've ever had or if you have any programs for perpetrators that are voluntary. Like if we were to address, if we knew there were some youth that have not been yet in conflict with the law, but they're perpetrators and we want to address them, if you would have any ideas or recommendations on how to attract them. So how to make a perpetrator program that is attractive so that they participate voluntarily and not only compulsory. So Zaira, hopefully you have translated the question and he can respond in Spanish. Oh, I can repeat the question in Spanish. Fernando, te repito la pregunta en español, así es más fácil que con la traducción. Estaba preguntando si alguna vez han tenido un programa para perpetradores que fuera voluntario, o sea, con jóvenes que sabemos que son perpetradores de violencia, pero que no han sido referidos por por la corte o por la policía. Y si... But Zaira, I don't think he hears me. He hears
Sí, la
you.
escucho. Sí,
Ah,
sí la
okay.
escucho.
Ok, Fernando, esto de la interpretación es un lío a veces. ¿Han tenido algún tipo de programa así? ¿Y qué usted sugiere para hacer que un programa de esa naturaleza sea atractivo y participen de manera voluntaria? Y usted puede responder en español y yo puedo repetir después de usted en inglés.
Muy bien, Ana. Sí, la verdad es de que sí es complicado. Hemos buscado experiencias y esta manera de que sea voluntario la atención y la participación de los ofensores o los perpetradores de violencia. Sin embargo, una de las características de los ofensores es de que no se reconocen como personas violentas. Puedan ser adolescentes, jóvenes o adultos, no se reconocen como ofensores. Es muy complicado. Puede que se encuentren ni siquiera en una etapa de precontemplación, de que han hecho algún daño a su pareja, o por ejemplo que golpean a su mamá, a su papá, a su abuelita. Si están bajo la influencia del alcohol o las drogas, dependiendo de la situación, pero regularmente no se reconocen como ofensores, ¿no? Entonces es muy complicado porque un tratamiento requiere desde 4 meses hasta 9 meses para que pueda ser efectivo. Entonces es muy complicado que acuda semanalmente una persona, un joven de manera voluntaria a sesiones terapéuticas. Es complicado. Sí se tiene que trabajar en la motivación. Incluso cuando es de manera obligatoria se tiene que trabajar en la motivación, pero es muy complicado. Entonces, una de las recomendaciones que nosotros damos es de que tienen que existir instituciones de procuración de justicia muy dispuestas a darle seguimiento a los casos de la violencia. Así es como nosotros identificamos cómo va madurando una comunidad en torno a la violencia que está viviendo. Es decir, si en su comunidad la policía no atiende los casos de violencia, no los investigan y no los procesan, entonces van muy atrás en este tema de combatir la violencia con ofensores en conflicto con la ley. Entonces, de las primeras acciones que se tienen que realizar es generar foros para convencer a las instituciones en esta labor que se tiene que realizar. No sé si contesté su pregunta.
Sí. Voy a traducir. Yeah, translate for Fernando. So he was saying that it is very complicated, that they have searched for ideas to do this voluntarily, but that most of the time, or always, the perpetrators don't identify themselves as violent people, not the adolescents and not the adults. Like they may be in a stage of pre-contemplation if they have hurt their partner or hit their mom or their grandma. They were under the effects of alcohol or drugs, but they don't recognize that. They don't see the need for the program because they don't see themselves as violent. And the treatment or the program takes from 4 to 9 months and have like weekly sessions. So it's very difficult that a young person will go weekly to therapeutic sessions voluntarily for such a long period of time. So what they recognize, they try to see where the community is at, and they look at the justice institutions and try to see if they follow up on cases of violence, to see how the community is maturing in terms of their approach to gender-based violence. For example, if in a community the police never responds or does anything with gender-based violence cases, then they're very, very behind. And the first thing would be to get the authorities to tackle the problem and create awareness.